Now, before I begin, I do want to point out something, is that the ancient world wasn't very kind to the disabled. And Claudius was, of course, handicapped. The primary sources talk about his deformities. He had a limp. He stuttered horribly. He had a nervous tic. And we're told when he got excited or animated, he drooled. And so he had these problems. And it's pretty clear that if Claudius would have come from a more humbler origin, he probably would have been exposed at birth. So he probably wouldn't survive. And as it became clear, say by his first birthday, that he did start to exhibit some, problems, his mother will get really frustrated with him, as we'll see. So, the fact that he was able to survive at all is in itself really an accomplishment. Now, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about his life until he becomes emperor. And of course, he is the fourth emperor. He reigns from 41 to 54. But he's born on the 1st of August in 10 BC. He's born in Lyon. His father had been stationed there. He has two older siblings. He has an older brother, Germanicus, who will become a great war hero. And then he has an elder sister who is very crafty, Livilla. His great-grandparents are Mark Antony and Octavia, the younger, Octavia Minor, who is Augustus's sister. So, very noble pedigree we have here. His grandparents are Livia, who of course mirrors Augustus, but she was pregnant when she married Augustus. And so the grandfather was Tiberius Claudius Drusus, and she gives birth to Drusus, known as Drusus the Elder. And Drusus the Elder will marry Antonina Minor, Antonina the Younger, and those are his immediate parents. Now, he's born in 10 BC, but his father dies in the following year in 9 BC while campaigning. And as it happens, is by his first year, as Claudius's disabilities start to become more apparent, there's trouble in the family. And in fact, Antonina, his mother, wants nothing to do with him. She calls him a monster. She refers to him as monster. She says that he's somebody who nature hasn't quite finished. So he's an incomplete child. And then she uses him as kind of a standard for stupidity. She'll say things like, well, you're as stupid as my son Claudius. And so he grows up in this type of environment surrounded by a lot of negativity. And Antonina doesn't want to have much to do with him. In fact, she ships him off to Livia, to his grandmother. And so Claudius will be sent back to the palace. And he's going to have an unusual experience for a Roman youth, especially a noble Roman youth, because rather than consort with his peers, he's stuck in the palace. And Augustus later says, we can't have him out in public because if people see him, they're going to laugh at him. And by extension, if they laugh at him, they're going to laugh at us. So he grows up within this palace. So he's going to be surrounded mainly by freedmen and women. And so throughout his entire life, he's always more comfortable around freedmen and women because throughout most of his life, hidden away in the palace, those are the people with whom he grew up. He spent his childhood. Now, Livia treats him a little bit better than his mom, but even she often won't talk to him directly in the same way that Augustus and Livia send these little notes back and forth to each other. Livia will send notes to Claudius or, reproving him, saying, you shouldn't have done that. But she does hire a tutor for him. And the first tutor that she does hire, we're told he used to be a mule driver. And so the idea was that a lot of the issues with Claudius could be beaten out of him or somehow removed. And so that Claudius's problems came from lack of willpower or bad moral fiber, and he simply needed, some type of, somebody to kind of take control and get him into shape, and he would get rid of a lot of these issues. In fact, he had a very strange childhood because, as we've seen, he's hidden away in the palace, and when his elder brother Germanicus is in Rome, and Germanicus and Claudius will celebrate the games together in honor of their father's memory, what happens is Claudius will be taken to the Circus Maximus, and he's muffled in a mantle, so he's kind of hidden away, so he won't be exposed to public view. And even when he reaches the age of manhood, where he's presented with the virile toga, what happens is this is all done at midnight and in secrecy. So usually it's a big ceremony, and it's very solemn, and all of your family participates. Well, Claudius is taken out of the palace. He's rushed out at midnight. He dons his toga of manhood and is brought back to the palace. So all this is done in secrecy. And so again, he has an unusual life because he's, sitting in the palace. Now, his sister, Livilla, heard a prophecy about Claudius, and it was prophecy that one time he would become an emperor, and she pitied the Romans that they would ever face, such a unhappy and undeserved fate. So you could see all the negative rhetoric coming from his family couldn't have helped, shape a healthy psyche. Now, Augustus in 7 AD finds a tutor for Claudius, and that tutor will, of course, be the historian Livy. And so Livy will be recruited to help Claudius because he has an interest in history. And so Claudius will spend a lot of time with Livy and Livy's assistant, Sulpicius Flavus, and a philosopher named Athenodorus. And so they'll spend a lot of time together. But we have these letters, again, Suetonius, from Augustus to Livia, where Livia was going out of town, and Augustus said that he would make a point of eating dinner, with Claudius and talk to him, and that he thought Claudius just simply needed a male role model because his dad died when he was so young, so he needed someone that he could emulate. And Augustus, although he hired Livy, seems a bit frustrated that he's hanging out with these bookworms, right? He wants him to hang out with people who were closer to his station, who were maybe have a military reputation. Augustus also praises Claudius to Livia, and Claudius does something surprising. He gives a speech. And so Claudius, who, is stuttering, and Augustus says that the speech is just so confusing. When you talk to him privately, you don't know what he's talking about. He can't, express himself at all. But the minute you give an opportunity to declaim, to make a public speech, it's clear, it's coherent, and very persuasive. That he uses the rules of oration to somehow structure his speech. And so he can talk publicly wonderfully. It's simply in these one-on-one situations that you have no idea what he's talking about because he babbles and stutters. So Augustus is amazed, and it seems to him bizarre. How can somebody speak so well publicly, but in private, he can't express himself at all? Now, under the tutelage of Livy, Claudius begins his writing career. And of course, he's the scholar emperor, right? He's a historian. And the first work he writes is a history of the civil wars. And the family reads it, and they are horrified. Remember, he is, after all, the grandson of Mark Antony, okay? And that means that he probably portrayed grandfather in a positive light, and that means his opponent, Octavian, now Augustus, was probably portrayed accurately, but maybe it was enough to upset Livia and to upset Augustus. And they were pretty certain at this point that Claudius could never be trusted with any of the family secrets. So no contemporary history. So the work was immediately suppressed. And really, the whole entire family is mad at Claudius. And so they tell him point blank that he's not allowed to write about anything contemporary. He's going to have to look to the past. Although we're told that later in his life, Claudius will go back to this history, and he rewrites the civil wars while omitting the entire history of the Second Triumvirate, which I don't understand how anybody could do. So he's able to do that to try to, leave maybe some of the bad the periods in which Mark Antony and Octavian didn't get along very well, and kind of excise them from the work. So that was his first work. He's going to continue to write, but much of his writing is done under the reign of Tiberius. Now, Augustus dies in 14 AD, and he is succeeded by his stepson, Tiberius. And Augustus had arranged that Tiberius would adopt Germanicus, Claudius's brother. And so the succession would be Augustus, Tiberius, and then Germanicus. And it's at this point that Claudius asks Tiberius if he could begin the cursus honorum, or the series of your introduction into Roman politics. So beginning with an aedileship or quaestorship and working your way up. And what Tiberius does is he responds by sending Claudius the insignia of a consul. So he's given the consular insignia, but it's kind of he's making a point. No, public office is not for you. So Claudius understands that, okay, well, I'm not going to have a career in politics, so let's think a little bit more about being a historian. Now, so he'll continue to write, but what's interesting is, despite the fact that he's been hidden away, he seems popular with the people, because the equestrians, when Augustus died, the equestrians asked Claudius to present their delegation, and so he would lead their delegation and to pay tribute. And also the Senate So, despite the fact that Tiberius made it very clear that Claudius wasn't going to have any type of political career, or any career in public office, nevertheless, he seemed to be popular with the people. For when Augustus died, the equestrians asked him to lead their delegation in the procession. And then, in fact, throughout Tiberius's reign, once Claudius's house will catch fire and burn down, the Senate asks that it be built at public expense. Tiberius said no. And then later the Senate asked that Claudius be able to address that body. And again, Tiberius said no. So Tiberius made it very clear that, he doesn't want Claudius anywhere around power. So he is going to lead a quiet, reclusive, scholarly life. And in fact, it's under the reign of Tiberius where it's one of his most productive periods of writing. And what does he write? Well, he writes a 20-volume history of the Etruscans called the Tyrannica. He writes it in Greek. So remember, his family asked him to get involved in antiquarian interests. Don't write about anything contemporary. So he writes about the Etruscans. So he could read Etruscan at that point. And not only do we have a 20-volume work, but he also wrote an Etruscan dictionary. So we have this history of the Etruscans. We have an Etruscan dictionary. And then he continues with an 8-volume history of Carthage. So he probably could read Punic. We've got a history of Carthage. And then he writes on other matters as well. And here's some of the problems with using Suetonius as a reliable source, because it's during this period that Suetonius tells us that he's hanging out with freedborn men, drinking all the time and playing dice, when in fact that's not very likely, because this was a very productive period for Claudius. But he did in fact have an affinity for dice, and he writes a book on dice. So he does this at this time too. And he presumably starts his autobiography at this period. We know he writes, uses it, or continues writing throughout his life in the autobiography. And it's used by many historians. Tacitus uses it, Suetonius uses it, and Pliny the Elder will use it, as a source. It's also probably at this time that he decides that the Latin alphabet needs to be reformed, and he proposes the creation of 3 new letters. And when he becomes emperor, all 3 of the letters will be used, but they'll fall out of use after his reign. And in fact, we have material evidence for 2 of the Claudian letters today. And so they're on inscriptions and monuments. So he proposes this reform of the alphabet. Now, so he's locked out of power, and this might have been a good thing for Claudius because he's able to survive, when in fact during this period of Tiberius's reign, both his brother and his sister will come to untimely ends. First, concerning Germanicus, Germanicus had been adopted by Tiberius and was presumably the next in line, although Tiberius had a son, so there would be some type of power-sharing agreement. Germanicus came back from fighting in Germany, had a great triumph, and obviously Tiberius was jealous and paranoid, a little bit scared, and so he decides at this point that Germanicus needs to go out east, and so he shipped out east, and Germanicus almost immediately falls afoul of the provincial governor of Syria, Piso, and there's a lot of quarreling between them. And just about everything Germanicus proposes or tries to do, Piso will overturn. Germanicus he takes his entire family with him. So we've got Agrippina the Elder and, all the kids. And so they visit Egypt, probably a family holiday, but Tiberius didn't like it one bit because you needed permission of the princeps in order to visit Egypt. It was an imperial province, and it had been since Octavian, assumed it. So Germanicus gets in a little bit of trouble for that. And when he goes back to Syria, he finds that Piso had overturned everything that he had attempted to do. And even worse, Germanicus falls sick. And we're told that all throughout the house, you can see dead animals or little things that have Germanicus' name inscribed on it. And so most of the family thinks that somebody's using black magic or something to try to kill him. And in fact, he gets sicker and sicker. And he's convinced that Piso himself is poisoning him. And so this goes on for a while until Germanicus ultimately dies. And then Agrippina the Elder takes the family. They sail back. They take Germanicus' ashes. They sail back to Italy. And then they're met by, everyone at Brundisium. And they come to Rome. And there's such pressure on Tiberius to do something about this that he's forced to put Piso on trial for killing Germanicus. And as it happens, Piso commits suicide while he's in trial. So a lot of people thought that Tiberius had some involvement in it. Agrippina probably did. But with Agrippina back at Rome, there's going to be another power center that, is anti-Tiberius. And Tiberius is already, suspicious and paranoid and jealous. So that's going to cause some problems. Now, things literally come to a head during Tiberius's reign when he appoints Sejanus as his Praetorian prefect. So he'll be the head of the Praetorian Guard. And Sejanus was very ambitious, and he's probably trying to get adopted into the family and maybe become princeps himself. But he realizes Tiberius's shortcomings, how he's suspicious and paranoid, and Sejanus is able to feed into them. Look, there's a conspiracy here, there's another one here. And so the treason trials really pick up. And Sejanus and Agrippina don't get along at all. In fact, Livilla, Claudius' sister, had been married to Tiberius' son. And he, again, gets sicker and sicker and sicker and is probably poisoned, dies. But as it turns out, Livilla had been having an affair with Sejanus all along. And then, in fact, after Tiberius' son dies, Sejanus asks if he can marry Livilla. And Tiberius, wait, you've really overstepped your bounds here. No. And Agrippina decides that she wants to get remarried too. And Tiberius says no. So the treason trials began, and then Tiberius, for various reasons, gets frustrated living at Rome, and he'll move to Capri, the island of Capri. And once he's at Capri, Sejanus goes wild. Agrippina finds herself exiled, then she'll be murdered. And her two eldest sons end up exiled, and they're killed as well. So Sejanus moves against everyone. And we don't know what happened. And in fact, Claudius, this will be his second marriage, but Sejanus says, hey, my adoptive sister needs a husband, and what can Claudius do, in order to stay alive? You kind of have to say yes, and so he does. And so his second wife is actually Sejanus' adoptive sister. Now, while Tiberius is away, things are out of control. We don't know exactly what happened, but Tiberius found out that Sejanus was working for himself and not for Tiberius. And he sends a letter to the Senate in which he denounces Sejanus. And this is the downfall of Sejanus. And Sejanus falls and is executed, as is everyone around him. And of course, Claudius divorces his second wife because he can't be, surrounded by Sejanus in any way. Livilla, Claudius' sister, at this point, there's different traditions. Either she committed suicide or was murdered. But the one tradition is her own mom has her locked in her bedroom, where she starves herself to death. Well, she's forced to starve herself to death because of all of her, actions regarding her husband and regarding Sejanus. So neither Livilla nor Germanicus survived the reign of Tiberius, but Claudius does. And so Claudius, he really has some level of political acumen where he's able to stay under the radar, and he's only visible when he really needs to be, but he does survive the reign of Tiberius. And when Tiberius dies in 37, that means that our next emperor is going to be Gaius, or that is Caligula. And so for Caligula, Claudius was Uncle Claudius. And so Gaius will bring Claudius into the political mix. And in fact, he starts to have a political career under Caligula. In 37, he is made consul. So he'll be Claudius will be consul with Caligula. Now, the reason Caligula does this is because he's trying to invoke the memory of the great war hero Germanicus. So we've got the son of Germanicus, the only living son of Germanicus, Gaius, and the brother of Germanicus. And here they are together. And so that will, excite and inspire all the Romans. And so that's done. But what Claudius finds is that Caligula has no real plan for him except to humiliate him. And what happens is Claudius, who had been kind of a scholarly recluse, now becomes a court gesture. And Caligula will do lots of things to play games on him and tricks him, and some of them are really dangerous. We know that there was an episode when they were consuls that Claudius was supposed to have statues made of Caligula's older brothers, and there was some problem with that, which infuriated Caligula. There was a conspiracy that had been detected, and Claudius traveled up to the Rhine to let Caligula know that it had been detected and put down. But what Caligula did is he had his guards go out and meet Claudius, and they grabbed him and they threw him in the Rhine River, which, might sound kind of funny, but it's really dangerous. They could have killed him. So, and then, in fact, Caligula creates a new priesthood and invites Claudius and other wealthy Romans to join. But, of course, the entrance fees are exorbitant. And so we're told that Claudius grows sicker throughout Caligula's reign, and it was probably due to the stress, right? So, he becomes this court gesture and a fool, and probably, it's at this point that more and more Romans, when they think about Claudius, they think of him as a fool, because that's what Caligula did. He tried to portray his uncle in that manner. Now, in 41, what happens is Caligula's assassinated. And what happens now? Well, we have this conspiracy. Caligula's out of the picture. We're told the Praetorian Guard run to the palace. And what do they find there? Shivering, hiding behind a curtain on a balcony, is Uncle Claudius. And there are different traditions, but the one is one of the Praetorian Guards pulls back the curtain and sees him, and Claudius drops to his knees and says, spare me, spare me. But the guard says, Emperor. So he's going to be promoted. What happens is the Praetorians put Claudius in a litter, and they bring them back to the Praetorian camp. Now, Claudius has no idea what's going to happen here. And, of course, the people, the pedestrians, the bystanders, are looking around, and they see Claudius in this litter, and the assumption is that he's going to be executed. And so they all feel sorry for him. But he's carted back to the Praetorians, and once he gets to the camp, he probably realizes that he's safe, that nothing's going to happen. Meanwhile, the Senate's meeting, and the Senate knows that Caligula is assassinated, and they're excited because Caligula's reign was literally a reign of madness. So everybody's happy that he's out of the picture, but nobody knows what to do next. And here's where Josephus comes in as a useful primary source, because he has the senators screaming, liberty, liberty, we want liberty. And then Suetonius tells us that the senators were deliberating about restoring the republic, which is probably unlikely. The reality is that probably the senior senators were trying to vie for power and create power centers to see which one of them would become the next princeps. And so there was bickering going on in the Senate, which lasted 2 days. At one point, the senators asked for Claudius to come in to address that body, but for better or for worse, he's within the Praetorian camp, and the Praetorians don't want him to go because the Praetorians know, after all, that, you know, in order for them to get a paycheck, they need an emperor. So they like having Claudius right there. And during this 2-day period, apparently people in the street started to call for Claudius. They wanted an emperor. And so the Senate will eventually acquiesce. It's going to back down and say, okay, Claudius, you're a princeps. They're not going to like it one bit. In the meantime, what happens is the Praetorian Guards all take oaths of allegiance to Claudius, and then he grants well, I guess we call it a donative. It's it's 15,000 sesterces to all the soldiers. So from a senatorial perspective, it will seem like at some level that he's a usurper, right? Because he was installed by the Praetorians, and that maybe he actually purchased his office by means of, you know, granting the soldiers all of this money. So there's immediately tension between the Senate, because the Senate had an opportunity to get rid of the Julio-Claudians, to establish, you know, a republic, which I don't think is likely at this point, but at least a princeps from another family line, and they weren't able to. So they were, by means of Praetorian Guard, Claudius was established as the new princeps. Right. So what happens now? Well, what Claudius does is he allows for all the papers of those 2 days to be destroyed, in which the Senate talked about a new constitution and all of these other things. They're destroyed. The Senate said, okay, Caligula's assassins get to live. And Claudius said, well, that's kind of a bad example of allowing regicides, right? So he he allowed most of them to live except for the main conspirators. So, you know, some were killed. And then once he becomes princeps, he has his grandmother, Livia, proclaimed Augusta. So she's a goddess. And then his mother, too, Antonina, is proclaimed Augusta. So he deifies both his mother and his grandfather. And what we see is that a lot of people in the Senate don't like him. They don't trust him. We've seen, you know, maybe he's a usurper, maybe he purchased his position. But he's going to try his entire life to establish good relations with the Senate. It's important to realize that there are conspiracies behind his back all over the place. And so while he tries to work well with the Senate, there's a lot of people in the Senate who simply don't like him or have their own desire to become princeps. And so almost immediately, there's a plotted coup out of Dalmatia, where the provincial governor, Scribonianus, was working with some senators. And apparently the plan was that Scribonianus would lead the armies from Dalmatia down to Rome, where you overthrow Claudius. But as it turns out, you know, as soldiers had gotten a raise, the soldiers liked Claudius. And so when this coup attempt was detected, Scribonianus was forced to commit suicide. And so what does Claudius have to do? He has to kill, you know, the people involved. And so there are a lot of coups like this. So at every turn in Claudius's reign, there's, you know, an attempted coup. So one of the ways he has to address these coups is through execution. And so this doesn't do much to improve his reputation with the senatorial class.